Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and licensed products. So it's really interesting. It's really quite fascinating. Dungeons and Dragons has a really interesting relationship to licensed tabletop role playing games. So one, actually, 5th edition is connected to two tabletop. Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition specifically is connected to two very famous, very powerful intellectual properties. They're not close to the most famous, but they're two powerful television intellectual properties. So let's discuss them. First and foremost is Stranger Things. There's a Stranger Things Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition box set, and they're very, very oddly, there is a Dungeons & Dragons Rick and Morty 5th edition box set. By the way, I think as we go over time, I think the Dungeons & Dragons Rick and Morty box set is a massive mistake. I really, really do. So generally, you see these two very limited intellectual property connections to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, but overall, Dungeons & Dragons is incredibly careful to not deal with intellectual property at any significant high end in any significant way. It keeps it really limited, and really keeps, I really think, more than anything, Dungeons & Dragons keeps a cap on intellectual property. And I think one of the reasons why is Dungeons & Dragons as 5th edition has a very unusual relationship to commerce. Right, so Dungeons & Dragons 1E, Dungeons & Dragons 2E were the most unstable economic structures ever, like in tabletop role-playing games. There were multiple points where the company was, making tons of money, but failing to balance what it was spending, what Dungeons & Dragons overall was spending, and what it was making. All right. So when it came under guardianship of Hasbro in 3rd edition, 4th edition, and 5th edition, the first thing Hasbro did was they were like, hey, we need a small team to make these rules. We don't need 600. There were 600 people working for TSR at one point. That's crazy. There's way too many people to be working on Dungeons & Dragons. So Hasbro scaled it way back and created a very small team, right? And that has allowed them to keep the costs on Dungeons & Dragons very, very low, okay? So that has been a huge help for Dungeons & Dragons, and it was fiscally responsible, right? And so 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition have been more fiscally stable than any other, than 1st or 2nd ever were, okay? So, and I think one of their decisions is they are incredibly hesitant to establish any kind of a long-term intellectual licensed property deal. And the reason why is, overall in tabletop role-playing game, if you pay attention to licensed products in tabletop role-playing game industry, it is a terrible track record, okay? I can name many companies that have held licenses and then lost them. Fantasy Flight Games held the Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game license, lost it, right? Fate, I don't think they make the Dresden books anymore, right? I don't think there's any new Dresden books coming out, right? And even if they are, I know for a fact Fate, Evil Hat Games has really struggled over the last few years. That licensed property did not really help them. Fantasy Flight Game. And then Battlestar Galactica tabletop role playing game went nowhere. Street Fighter, Indiana Jones. I could just name them, and every single time, the company that had it is not flush with cash. They had it for a brief period of time. They had a little bit of money. They lost the license. And the reason why is large intellectual properties just simply don't generate the kind of money. Tabletop role-playing games don't generate the kind of money that the large intellectual properties are used to seeing. TTRPG is just a fundamentally bad business model. It truly is. It's fantastic. Tabletop role-playing games are fantastic products for game masters and players, but they're terrible, terrible products for companies. Okay, and so now we get to the big three, right? So you got Marvel, you got DC, you got Star Wars, and you have Harry Potter. Harry Potter has never allowed the name of that product to ever go on any tabletop role-playing game, right? And trust me, they're not gun shy when it comes to merch, right? They've done it on a lot of other products, right? Marvel, you cannot buy a Marvel tabletop role-playing game today, not that's in print right now, right? Same thing with DC and Star Wars. The only one that's left is Fantasy Flight Games, and I think that's spinning down. I'm pretty sure that whole game thing is spinning down, and it has not done well for them. So I think, it's shocking, but Dungeons and Dragons has exhibited wisdom in staying away from large-scale licensed properties. They do, the box sets were very limited products. They did them almost as a lark, almost for fun, right? But the reality is, I think when it comes to tabletop role-playing games, tabletop role-playing game companies do not do great from licensed products. Now, why do companies actually get these licensed products? Well, the reason why is they get street cred. They want to align themselves with very, very, very smart audiences, and they don't really care about the money. They want the street cred that comes with being a tabletop role-playing game, which there's a lot of street cred from it. So, all that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Why do you think tabletop role-playing games just increasingly fail to really deliver and have 20, 30, 40-year-long runs with large intellectual properties? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.